Thank you very much for the invitation. The enemy is always invisible. He ceases to be the enemy when he becomes visible. I would like you to think about this in your own reality and in your own life. My name is Karim Ben KHELIFA. I've been a war correspondent for the last 15 years. And I've worked for magazines such as Vanity Fair, Time magazine, Newsweek, Le Monde in Paris, Stern magazine in Hamburg. And with this, I've reached large audiences, but also audiences that are highly educated, that have spending power, audiences that have the right to vote, so potentially audiences that can have an impact. But I kept running conflict after conflict to have an impact as a photojournalist. I would like to show you some of my work before we dive into the rest. I grew frustrated with my work. I realized 10 years into my career as a photojournalist and war correspondent that I had a moral contract with my subjects. Why do people accept to be photographed in the worst time of their life, when they are most vulnerable? Just because I came from a faraway country? Just because I'm there with them? Or do they hope that my work and the publication would actually affect them for the better? And I think this is why they allow me to photograph them. I'm not saying journalism doesn't have an impact. I don't want you to walk away from here with this. Journalism has an impact. But it's really hard when it comes to war. And let me give you an example. It's Sunday morning. You had a heavy week of work. You're coming back home. You're sitting down in your couch in your living room, and then you're picking up a magazine. The magazine you subscribe to, the one you trust. And it's a special issue on the war in Syria. And you read it all. You go across the magazine, you're looking at every photograph. You're going through every article. And you understand how complex that issue is. But then the Monday comes. What can you do? What could you do? Let's back up a bit. You're still sitting in this couch. You're still picking up the magazine, but it's not a special issue on the war in Syria. It's a special issue on climate change. And the same way you did with the other magazine, you're going through. You understand the complexities of the issue, and then the Monday morning comes. And that Monday morning, you decide to take your bike, or to go to buy metro to your work instead of taking your car. You start buying less plastic and recycle the plastic, or you start buying local products instead of products that are from the other side of the world. You have a sense of agency on this, which is really hard to have with a war. I have the privilege with my work to go on both sides. And each time I go on both sides, I meet fighters and civilians. And I see human beings. It's not that I always want to live in the world they are fighting for, but they are humans. And that is a story I had really a hard time telling. It's an invisible story. And I tried to do this. What you see on the screen is called Portrait of the Enemies. It was my attempt as a photojournalist to tell that story. And let me explain you. This is a publication in Foreign Policy, and this is a publication in Le Monde. But let me explain you how I thought about this work. I would make a portrait of a fighter, and I would ask him 6 questions. And that portrait would go on the wall like this. And then I would go on the other side of the conflict, and I would do a portrait of his enemy. And it would go up, right in front of the other one. And I would ask them 6 questions. Who's your enemy? Why? Did you ever kill him? What is violence to you? What is peace to you? And where do you see yourself in 20 years from now? Now, if you think about those questions, they are twofold. When I'm asking them who's his enemy, we know Israeli and Palestinians are enemies. We're not learning much from there. But what is striking is when I'm asking questions about themselves, violence, peace, and the dream of 20 years from now. How do they live that? And the answers are similar. Then I was lucky. I was invited at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism. You just met James Gary, deputy curator of the foundation. And I had a year to recharge my journalism, to think about my work, and to look in audience engagements, how to bring younger generation to journalism. It was a very beautiful year where I could back up and start thinking. And with this, I was thinking about cross-pollination in journalism. How could other disciplines enrich journalism? And then I was invited at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I became an artist in residence. And there, I could put in practice everything I had thought the year before. And I discovered virtual reality. And I wondered, what would happen to this project that I had that was photographed? What would happen if the fighter is in the room with you? If he looks at you in the eyes? But also, I would be bringing something in journalism that doesn't exist yet. Something we are all using every day. Reading the body language of the person you don't know as he speaks to you and understanding who they are. It took 4 years, and we did it. Let me show you the trailer.
frustration as a photojournalist and war correspondent. For almost 20 years, I have photographed conflicts and witnessed the consequences of huge geopolitical shifts. When I became a father, I simply knew I could not keep working on the front lines. Yet, I was not done trying to understand wars. My friends in Israel, when they know I'm heading for Gaza, can't help themselves but to wish me luck and to stay safe. They believe a lot of people in Gaza are irrational. Also, when I spend weeks working in Gaza and I'm about to return to Israel, my Palestinian friends are telling me the exact same thing. Be careful there. The project is rooted in my experience as a war photographer, going from one side of the front line to the other, and finding that the fighters' dreams, hopes, and nightmares are often more similar than they are different. So there is a bigger story than the war itself, and this is the one I want to explore and share. For the enemy, I am using the latest technologies in virtual and augmented realities, so you can engage directly with the combatants and meet them, hear them, and feel them the way I did. In many parts of our world, you create an enemy as a kid without having met your enemy, because the society around you has created an enemy in the other. So the question is, could I be you if I was on the other side?
So the enemy is a 300-meter square installation for 20 users at the same time that works the space. You meet the fighters, they are talking to you. You go from Israel, Palestine, to El Salvador, to Congo, meeting those people. And I want to show you what does it look like from inside. This is a user walking and what he sees. And if you look, I'm not bringing to you a war zone. It's a neutral space. You have to make a choice, and it's based on who you are. Who are you going to listen first? And eventually, that becomes a personal encounters. You feel the presence of the other person. We make sense of the world through stories, but we remember it through experience. And I invite you to think about love. You've heard of love before you felt it, and those two things are very different. So what happens when journalism becomes an experience? My takeaway is users start having a change in perception sometimes. They start questioning the bias and stereotypes they have. And I think this is what journalism should bring. But it was very, very interesting when we brought this work back to Israel. There, young and older Israeli would walk towards their enemy. His name is Abu Khaled. He's a fighter from Gaza. And nowhere in the real life they could do this. I want to show you a testimony of an active Israeli soldier who, for the first time, met his enemy in his eyes.
גם להבין שהצד השני הוא בקצור, עוד שנה, לא יודע מה יעשה אותי, אבל בטוח זה משהו, מי שעדה, כאילו, זה בטח משהו כנגד האויב, כביכול, כאילו, אני יכול להילחם בגדול, שמסתכל לו בעיניים עכשיו. זה... לא אמור, גם כשאתה חייב, אתה לא מקבל את זה, לעמוד מול האויב שלך, ולשמוע אותו, זה טוב כמו שאתה מקבל בצבא.
The enemy is always invisible, and he ceases to be the enemy when he becomes visible. I would argue that journalism needs experimentation. Journalism needs to bring a conversation that is sometimes uncomfortable. I invite you to check The Enemy one floor down from here. It's the augmented reality version. And I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you very much.